I never should have taken that picture, Emma thought as she stared at her phone, eyes wide with disbelief. One click, just one innocent click, and her world changed forever. The photo she snapped at the gala had gone viral overnight. It wasn't just a random picture. It was a window into a world she didn't know existed. The moment it hit the internet, the phone calls started pouring in. News outlets, strangers. But one call stood out. It was Dominic Romano. The name alone sent a chill down her spine. Dominic Romano wasn't just any businessman. He was the Mafia boss, the man who controlled everything in this city. And he wanted that photo. Emma's heart raced as she read the text that followed. Give me the original, or you'll regret it. She thought it was a joke at first. Who would actually threaten her over a picture? But she soon realized this was no joke. Her photo had captured something powerful, something Dominic needed to keep hidden. When she tried to ignore the message, the threats grew louder. Soon, his men showed up. Men in suits, their eyes cold and unwavering, surrounding her like a predator closing in on prey. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward and said, "Mr. Romano wants to see you." Now, panic gripped Emma. She didn't know what she had stumbled upon, but she knew she was in over her head. She tried to back away, but the man reached out and grabbed her arm. "No more running," he said, his grip firm and unyielding. She was taken to a luxurious penthouse, Dominic's private residence. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the weight of his presence, even before she saw him. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city with an air of absolute control. His sharp suit and intense gaze made it clear that this wasn't a man who took no for an answer. When he turned to face her, his piercing eyes met hers, and it was like time stopped. There was no kindness in them, only authority. "You know why you're here," he said, his voice calm, yet full of power. "That photo you took, it belongs to me now." Emma couldn't move. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. As if he already owned her, as if. She had no choice but to comply. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, trying to hold her ground. But Dominic wasn't having it. He took a step closer, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. "You've seen too much," he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll either give me that photo, or I'll make sure you'll regret it. It's your choice." Emma's mind raced. What had she gotten herself into? Was she already in too deep to get out? She had no idea what game he was playing, but she knew one thing for sure. Dominic Romano wasn't someone you could say no to. She had to figure out how to get out of this mess. But first, she needed to know what the photo really meant. Was it just an image? Or was it the key to a world she was never meant to enter? Emma stood frozen, her mind racing as Dominic took a step closer. The room felt colder, the weight of his presence suffocating. She had never been this close to someone so powerful, and the chill of fear wrapped around her heart. Dominic's sharp gaze never left her, and it was clear he wasn't going to let her go without a fight. "You think you can walk away from this?" he asked, his voice cold but commanding. "You've already seen too much. That photo isn't just an image. It's a threat to everything I've worked for." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her mind was a blur. She was caught in the eye of a storm, and she had no idea how to navigate her way out. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed to say, her voice shaky. Dominic smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives just before they pounce. "I think you do, Emma. You just don't want to admit it yet." He walked past her, his suit rustling as he moved. Emma watched him, trying to read him, but it was impossible. He was like a wall, unbreakable, untouchable. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I just want to go back to my life." Dominic stopped in his tracks and turned slowly to face her. "Your life?" he repeated, his tone dark. "You think you can go back to a normal life after this?" "No, Emma. You're already in it now." He stepped closer again, this time his presence almost overwhelming. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic's eyes softened for just a moment, and Emma felt a flicker of something. Was it regret? But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating man she had first met. "Because you've seen something no one else was meant to see," he said. "You're involved now. And once you're in, there's no getting out." Emma felt her pulse quicken. The fear that had started as a quiet hum in her chest was now a roar, drowning out her thoughts. She had no idea how she had gotten here, but one thing was certain. She couldn't just walk away. Dominic was right. She was already too deep. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic took another step closer, and she could feel the heat of his body, the power in his presence. "I want you to understand, Emma. The photo wasn't a mistake. It was fate. And now, you're part of this world, whether you like it or not." Emma swallowed hard, trying to push the lump in her throat away. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape. But she was trapped. Dominic's world had already consumed her. "You can't hide from this," he added, his voice low, almost a growl. "You're mine now, and I don't let go." Emma's heart sank as the weight of his words hit her. There was no escape. She was in it now. The world she had stumbled into was darker and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. But one question still lingered in her mind. What did Dominic want with her? What was the truth behind that photo? And more importantly, what would she do when the storm finally hit? Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're mine now." The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. How could a simple photo have led her here? To this dark, unfamiliar world where power and fear intertwined, where every step she took felt like she was sinking deeper into something she could never escape. Dominic's presence was overwhelming, and as much as she wanted to deny it, she could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. He was right. There was no turning back. She was already in this world now. But what was this world really? Emma found herself wondering what he meant by fate. She couldn't understand how something as innocent as a photo could have so much power. What was it about that image that had Dominic so desperate to get his hands on the original? "Why do you want the photo so badly?" she asked, her voice softer now, trying to keep her composure. Dominic didn't immediately answer. He moved towards the window, his silhouette framed by the city lights. For a moment, Emma thought he might not respond at all. But then he turned back to face her, and she saw a flicker of something that looked like regret or maybe even a hint of vulnerability. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "It's not just a photo, Emma," he said, his voice low and measured. "It's a key to something that could destroy everything I've built." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What was he talking about? "What could a photo possibly mean to someone like you?" she asked, though she wasn't sure if she wanted to hear the answer. Dominic's eyes flickered with something dangerous, but he kept his composure. "You've seen enough to know, Emma. That photo links me to things that should have stayed buried. People would do anything to get their hands on it. If they find out what you have," he trailed off, his gaze hardening. Emma swallowed, her throat dry. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want you to understand that you're part of this now," he said, his tone calm but filled with authority. "You're involved, whether you like it or not." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if she was more afraid of Dominic or the unknown forces he was talking about. "I don't want any part of this," she said, more forcefully now, even though the fear still gnawed at her insides. Dominic's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's too late for that," he said. "You already are." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down Emma's spine. She was trapped. She didn't know how, but somehow, she had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The world Dominic spoke of, his world, wasn't a place she ever wanted to be. But now, she had no choice. She had to find a way out. But first, she needed to figure out what he meant by that photo, and why it was so important. What was at stake? And how far would Dominic go to protect his secrets? Emma's mind raced as she tried to process everything Dominic had said. The photo, the key, the power it held. She felt trapped, but she couldn't let herself be swallowed by fear. Dominic's presence was overwhelming, but there had to be something she could do. She couldn't just let him control her life. "What exactly is it that you're afraid of?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. Dominic's expression hardened, and for a moment, she thought he might ignore her. But then he answered, his voice colder than before. "People would do anything to get their hands on that photo," he said, his eyes narrowing. "It's not just a random picture. It's a record of a deal gone wrong. And those people, whoever they are, will stop at nothing to make sure it stays hidden." Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "But I didn't know what I was taking when I snapped that picture. I don't even know what it means." Dominic studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. You don't need to know. You're just a part of it now. And whether you like it or not, you're involved. His words felt like a weight, pressing down on her chest. But she couldn't back down. I didn't sign up for this, she said, her voice firm. I'm not some pawn in your game. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. You're already a part of this, he repeated, his voice softer but no less certain. Whether you choose to play or not, you're in it. And I'll protect you as long as you do what's needed. But if you don't, he trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't afford to make enemies in Dominic's world, but she wasn't going to sit back and let him control her either. What do you want from me? She asked, still trying to find some leverage, some way to get out of this. Dominic's lips curled into a slight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. I want the truth, he said simply. I want you to understand the stakes here. That photo is more than just an image. It's a part of something much bigger, something dangerous. And if you want to walk away from it, you'll need to understand what you're up against. Emma swallowed, trying to hide the fear that crept up inside her. She had no idea what she was walking into, but there was no turning back now. Dominic had made it clear she was already in too deep. So what now? She asked, trying to sound calm, despite the turmoil inside her. Now, Dominic said, his voice steady. We figure out what to do next. You can either help me, or you can get out of the way. But either way, I'm getting that photo. Emma looked him in the eye, her pulse still racing. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she also knew that if she didn't play along, she might be in even deeper trouble. I'll help you, she said quietly, but the words felt like a betrayal to herself. Dominic nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. Good choice, he said. Now we'll see if you can handle what comes next. Emma's heart was racing as she sat across from Dominic. His eyes never left her, the intensity of his gaze making her feel as though she was trapped in a game she didn't understand. She'd agreed to help him, but the reality of what she had just signed up for was hitting her. The weight of his words lingered in the air between them. You can either help me, or you can get out of the way. The choice felt impossible, but here she was, already in too deep. She couldn't back out now. She had no idea what she had just agreed to, but she knew one thing for sure. Dominic wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer. She had to keep her wits about her. What's the next step? She asked, trying to sound confident though. Her voice trembled slightly. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled together as he looked at her. We need to find the people who are after the photo. We need to figure out what they want with it and how to stop them from getting their hands on it. Emma nodded slowly, her mind working furiously. The photo was more than just a random image. It was a key to something big and dangerous, and Dominic had made it clear that if they didn't act fast, it could destroy everything. She didn't know who these people were or what they wanted, but the thought of being hunted for something she didn't fully understand terrified her. How do we find them? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up inside her. Dominic's expression remained unreadable. I have my ways, he said, but we'll need to be careful. These people don't play by the same rules. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. Emma swallowed hard. She wasn't used to being around people like Dominic, people who operated in the shadows, people who didn't care about laws or morality. But she had no choice now. She had to stick with him if she had any hope of getting out of this. What's the plan? She asked. Dominic looked at her for a moment, his eyes calculating. First, we need to gather information. We need to know who we're up against. And I need to know who you've been talking to. If you've told anyone about the photo, it could put us both in danger. Emma felt a pang of unease. She hadn't told anyone. At least, she hadn't meant to. But the way Dominic said it made her wonder if she had already made a mistake somewhere along the way. I haven't told anyone, she said quickly, her voice more defensive than she intended. Dominic raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue further. Good, he said simply. Now we work quietly. We don't draw attention to ourselves. Emma nodded, trying to push her doubts aside. She had to trust him, at least for now. She had no other choice. But as they began to lay out their plan, she couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper she went into this world, the harder it would be to find her way back out. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and every decision now felt like a step closer to something she couldn't control. I'll help you, she said, the words feeling heavy on her tongue. Dominic's gaze softened slightly, but it was still filled with that unwavering certainty. I knew you would, he said. And when this is over, you'll understand why you had to be a part of this. You'll see that it was the only way. Emma wasn't so sure about that, but she had to keep moving forward. The photo, the key, everything hinged on it. And Dominic, he was the only one who could help her figure out what it all meant. She just hoped she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life. Emma felt the tension in the air as she sat across from Dominic, her mind still trying to catch up with everything that had happened in the past few days. The plan was set, but she wasn't sure if she could trust it, if she could even trust him. Dominic had a way of making everything sound so certain, like there was no other option but to follow his lead. But this was no ordinary situation, and she had no idea where it would all lead. She could already feel herself slipping deeper into this dangerous game, and it was hard to see a way out. We'll start with the contacts, Dominic said, breaking her thoughts. He was sitting across from her, his expression calm, but there was something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten. I'll handle the more dangerous parts. You'll need to find out who you've been in contact with, who might know about the photo. Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure how much she could even remember. The few times she had mentioned the photo to friends, they hadn't seemed to care much about it. But was Dominic right? Could someone have overheard her? You'll be careful, he continued, his voice low. If anyone finds out you know too much, it will be too late to stop what happens next. Emma tried to keep her voice steady. I haven't told anyone, Dominic. I swear. She wanted to believe that, but she couldn't ignore the nagging fear that maybe she had made a mistake or missed something. Dominic's gaze softened, though the intensity never left his eyes. Good. We'll need to keep it that way. The fewer people know, the better. The photo is just the beginning. The weight of his words pressed on her chest. What had she really gotten herself into? The truth was, she didn't know. But she couldn't back out now, not without risking everything. What happens when we find them? She asked, trying to keep her mind on the present. Dominic leaned back, his gaze never leaving her. We'll have to act fast. If we wait too long, it'll be out of our control. He stood up, moving toward the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. You're in this now, Emma. You may not understand why yet, but you will. And when this is all over, you'll see that you were meant to be a part of this. Emma swallowed, her heart pounding. She didn't know if she believed him, but one thing was certain. She was already in too deep. What if I don't want to be a part of this? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Dominic turned, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, there was something almost vulnerable in his gaze. You already are, he said softly. Emma's stomach churned. She had no choice now. The photo had put her on this path, and Dominic had made it clear there was no turning back. She wasn't sure how much more she could take, but she had no other option but to keep moving forward. Dominic wasn't a man who allowed weakness, and in this world, she had to be strong, no matter how afraid she felt. She would find the truth behind the photo. She would follow Dominic's lead. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the more she learned, the less she would ever be able to walk away. The storm was coming, and there was no escape. The only question now was how much damage would be done before it hit. Emma walked the streets of Manhattan, trying to keep her thoughts focused. The city was as loud as ever, but she felt a growing sense of isolation. The weight of Dominic's words had not left her. You're already in this, he had said. She had no choice but to move forward, to help him, to find the people after the photo. But the more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. Was this really the right choice? Or had she just stepped into a world where there was no escape? She pushed the thoughts aside, forcing herself to focus. She had to stay calm. She had to follow through. She had made a decision. She had agreed to this dangerous game, and now she had to see it through. But as she walked down the street, she felt a growing unease. Something wasn't right. A part of her was still trying to convince herself that it was all just a misunderstanding, that Dominic had exaggerated the situation. But deep down, she knew better. The danger was real, and she was in it now, whether she liked it or not. She reached the small cafe where she had agreed to meet with one of Dominic's contacts. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to stay composed. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. The door to the cafe swung open, and she stepped inside, scanning the room for any sign of the person she was supposed to meet. Her eyes landed on a man sitting at the far corner, his eyes flicking up to meet hers as she entered. He gave a slight nod, indicating the seat across from him. She walked over and sat down, keeping her guard up. The man looked ordinary enough, But something about him made Emma uneasy. He had the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the kind of smile that made you question his true intentions. "You're Emma, right?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak at first. "Dominic told me you'd be here. He trusts you." Emma didn't know if that was a good or bad thing. She had learned quickly that Dominic's trust wasn't something to be taken lightly. "I'm here to help," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man's smile widened just slightly. "That's good to hear," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Because you're going to need all the help you can get. There are people out there who don't care who gets hurt in the process. People who want that photo badly enough to destroy anything or anyone that stands in their way." The words sent a chill down Emma's spine. She wasn't sure if he was trying to intimidate her or if he was simply stating the facts. Either way, the reality of the situation was sinking in. The photo wasn't just a simple image. It was a weapon, and she was holding it. She needed to find out more. "What exactly do we need to do?" she asked, trying to stay focused. The man leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We need to track down the people who are after it. They're more dangerous than you realize. They'll stop at nothing." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She was already in too deep. There was no turning back now. She didn't know how she had gotten here, but she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The photo, Dominic, these people, they were all connected, and she was in the middle of it. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. The man studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good. We'll start tomorrow." Emma stood up, trying to steady her breath, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The only question now was how far Dominic would go to protect the secrets he was hiding, and what that would mean for her. As she stepped out into the night, the city lights flickered above her, but all she could see was the darkness closing in. Emma woke up to the sharp buzz of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, but it felt like a lifetime had passed since the night she met Dominic's contact at the cafe. She reached for the phone, her hand still trembling from the events of yesterday. The message on the screen was from Dominic. "Meet me. 10 a.m. We have a lead." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't slept well, her mind racing with the consequences of her decisions. But this was it, the moment she had agreed to. She couldn't back out now. She forced herself to get out of bed, the weight of her exhaustion pulling at her, but the fear of what was to come was heavier. By the time she stepped out of the apartment, the sun was high, and the streets of the city were already busy with the usual hustle. But as she walked toward the cafe where she was supposed to meet Dominic, everything felt different. The world seemed quieter, like a storm was brewing just below the surface. She arrived a little early, and there was no sign of Dominic yet. She tried to steady her nerves by checking her phone, but nothing could shake the feeling that something was about to change. She sat at a corner table, trying to calm her breathing, but all she could think about was the photo, the key to everything. It wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a symbol of her involvement in this dangerous world. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew Dominic wouldn't stop until he had answers. She glanced around the cafe nervously, her eyes darting from one person to the next, wondering if they were watching her. She had never felt this exposed, but the longer she sat there, the more she realized that this was just the beginning. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Dominic stepped inside. His presence was impossible to ignore. He was exactly the same as before, calm, composed, but there was a certain tension in the air that made Emma's pulse quicken. He walked straight to her, his gaze steady, as if nothing could rattle him. "You're early," he said, a hint of approval in his voice. Emma forced a smile, but it felt weak. "I don't want to waste time," she replied, her voice low. Dominic nodded and sat down across from her. "Good. We don't have much of it." He slid a small envelope across the table. "This is the lead we've been waiting for. A name. A place. They're connected to the people after the photo." Emma stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she was ready to dive deeper into this world, but the truth was, she didn't have a choice. She opened the envelope slowly, pulling out a single piece of paper. The name was written in bold letters, Viktor Petrov. She looked up at Dominic. "Who is he?" "Petrov is a middleman," Dominic explained. "He arranges deals for people like us. But this time, the deal went wrong. The photo, he's the one who wants it, not just anyone. And he's the one who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." Emma's mind raced. What do we do now? Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. We find him. We find out what he knows about the photo. And we make sure it stays in our hands. Emma swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't back away now. When do we move? She asked, her voice steady, despite the anxiety creeping inside her. Dominic looked at her, his gaze unshaken. Now. Emma felt a sense of urgency wash over her as she followed Dominic through the narrow alley, her steps quick but measured. The city was alive with its usual hustle, but everything around her felt distant. The air was heavy with the weight of the moment. They were close to Petrov, close to finding answers. Dominic's stride was confident, almost predatory, and Emma couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed to move aside as he passed. There was power in the way he walked, power in the way he carried himself. Emma had never been so aware of how out of place she felt. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stay focused. This was the next step. There was no turning back. They arrived at a nondescript building, a small, gray structure tucked between two larger, more imposing ones. Dominic glanced at Emma, his eyes narrowing. Stay close. Don't draw attention, he said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension in his words. Emma nodded, her breath shallow. She had no idea what to expect inside, but the thought of what Petrov might know about the photo made her stomach turn. They entered the building, the air inside cool and still. Dominic led the way, moving with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. Emma tried to keep up, her footsteps echoing in the silence. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and Dominic paused, his hand on the doorknob. Remember, he said, his voice low. We're here to get information. Nothing more. If things go south, we leave. Emma's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. Got it, she whispered. With a swift motion, Dominic opened the door. The room was dimly lit, with a single light hanging overhead. At a desk in the far corner, a man sat, his back to them. He turned slowly, his eyes cold and calculating as they met Dominic's. Petrov. He was older than Emma expected, his graying hair contrasting with the sharpness of his features. There was a quiet intensity about him, a calmness that made Emma uneasy. Romano, Petrov said, his voice smooth but laced with disdain. You're early. Dominic didn't flinch. I don't have time for games, Petrov. I need answers. Petrov's lips curled into a thin smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Answers? You think I have answers for you? He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You've crossed a line, Dominic. You've been playing in my world long enough to know the rules. But you've made a mistake. You think you control this. Emma stood quietly by Dominic's side, watching the exchange unfold. She had no idea what Petrov was talking about, but she could sense the tension between them. It was clear that this wasn't just about a photo. This was about something deeper, something more dangerous. I don't care about your rules, Dominic said, his voice unwavering. I care about the photo. Where is it, Petrov? Petrov chuckled softly, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. You think that photo matters? He asked, his tone almost mocking. That photo is the least of your worries. Dominic's eyes narrowed, and Emma could feel the change in the air, like something was about to snap. Don't play games with me, Petrov, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You've been pulling the strings, and I want to know why. Petrov didn't respond immediately. He just stared at them, his expression unreadable. Emma's stomach churned with uncertainty. She had no idea what Petrov knew, but it was clear that he wasn't going to give up his secrets easily. If you want answers, Petrov finally said, his voice softening, you'll have to prove your worth more than just a photo. Dominic didn't say a word. He just stood there, his gaze unyielding. Emma's mind raced. What did Petrov mean by that? Was this just about the photo, or was there something more at play? She looked at Dominic, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't backing down. She had to trust him. For better or worse, they were in this together. And whatever Petrov had in mind, she was ready to face it. She had no choice. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Emma stood frozen as Petrov's words echoed in the small, dimly lit room. You'll have to prove your worth more than just a photo. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the meaning behind his cryptic message. She glanced at Dominic, whose face remained stoic, his expression unreadable. He was clearly unfazed, But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a web of danger that they might never escape. What do you mean by that? Dominic asked, his voice as steady as ever, but Emma could feel the tension in the air. Petrov leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he studied them both, his eyes calculating. You think this is about a photo? He asked, his voice soft but full of an eerie calmness. It's not. It's about control. It's about power. And you've stepped into my world without understanding the rules. Emma's stomach churned. She had no idea what Petrov was talking about, but she could feel the weight of his words. This was no longer just about a photo or a simple exchange of information. There was something much larger at play here. Dominic didn't flinch. I didn't come here for a lesson, Petrov. I came for the photo, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Petrov's lips curled into a thin, almost mocking smile. The photo is just a small piece of the puzzle. You want to understand, Dominic? You want to know why it matters? Then you'll have to play the game. And you're not going to like the rules. Dominic's eyes narrowed. I'm not here to play games. Then you're in the wrong place, Petrov replied, standing up from his chair with a fluid motion. He took a step closer to Dominic, his presence somehow even more imposing now that he was standing. You came for the photo, but what you don't realize is that this is about much more. The people after that photo, they're not just going to walk away. And neither should you. You're involved now, Dominic. And there's no turning back. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had never felt more out of her depth. The stakes were rising higher with every passing moment. Petrov's words felt like a warning, but she couldn't tell if it was a threat or just a twisted game he was playing. What exactly do you want from us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Petrov turned to her, his cold gaze locking onto hers. What I want, he repeated, his voice laced with amusement. I want to see if you can survive in this world. I want to see if you're truly prepared to play, to make the sacrifices that come with it. Emma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure if Petrov was testing them, or if he was simply toying with their lives. But one thing was certain. She had no choice but to follow Dominic, even if it meant losing herself in the process. I'm not afraid of you, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Petrov's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. You should be, he said softly, but you'll learn soon enough. Emma's heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Dominic. He gave her a small nod, as if telling her to stay strong. She didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was clear. Things were about to get much worse before they got better, and she had no idea how much further she could go before she was swallowed whole by this world. But she had no choice. Dominic had made his decision, and now, so had she. The game was on, and there was no turning back. Emma sat in the car next to Dominic, her hands trembling as she stared out of the window. The streets of the city passed by in a blur, but her mind was far from the world outside. Petrov's words echoed in her mind, each one heavier than the last. You'll have to play the game. She had no idea what that meant, but she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. What kind of game was she caught in? And how far was she willing to go? Dominic didn't say a word as they drove, his eyes focused on the road ahead, his face unreadable. The silence between them felt thick with tension. Emma could tell he was thinking, but he didn't share his thoughts with her. It made her feel more isolated than ever. Where are we going? She asked, breaking the silence, her voice quiet but firm. Dominic glanced over at her, his expression softening for just a moment. We have a meeting, he said simply, his tone calm but serious. With someone who can help us track down Petrov's connections. We need to be one step ahead. Emma nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She had agreed to this, but she didn't know how much more of this world she could take. Every time she thought she had a handle on it, something new would happen to throw her off balance. It wasn't just the danger. It was the uncertainty, the feeling that everything was constantly shifting beneath her feet. The car pulled up to an unmarked building, tucked away on a quiet street. It looked like any other office building, but Emma could sense that this was no ordinary meeting. Dominic got out first and walked toward the entrance, his pace steady, confident. Emma hesitated for a moment before following him, her heart beating faster with each step. They entered the building, and the air inside was cool and sterile, the kind of place where secrets were kept behind closed doors. Dominic led her down a hallway, and they stopped in front of a door. He knocked once, and after a brief moment, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, her expression guarded but professional. She looked at Dominic first, then turned her gaze to Emma. This is Emma, Dominic said, his voice low. She's helping us. The woman nodded but didn't say anything. She stepped aside to let them in. Inside, the room was sparsely furnished, just a few chairs, a desk, and a large screen on the wall. The woman gestured for them to sit down, and they did. I'm Sarah, she said, her voice smooth but firm. I know what you're looking for. She looked at Emma. And I know you're in deeper than you realize. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure what Sarah knew, but she could tell this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. Sarah moved to the desk and pulled up a file on the screen. Petrov isn't just a middleman, she said, her tone serious. He's a part of a much larger network. And he's not the only one after that photo. There are others. Dominic's gaze hardened. How do we find them? He asked, his voice sharp. Sarah looked at him, then back at Emma. We'll need to move fast. Petrov has already made contact with some very dangerous people. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to get what you need. Emma's heart raced as Sarah's words sank in. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and she was in the middle of it all, with no clear way out. What's the plan? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Sarah looked at Dominic, then at Emma. We need to use the photo as bait, but we'll have to be careful. If we play our cards wrong, we could end up with more enemies than we can handle. Emma swallowed, trying to calm the fear building inside her. She had no idea how far Dominic was willing to go to get the answers they needed, but she knew one thing. There was no going back now. She had made her choice. And now, she had to see it through. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice stronger than before. Sarah nodded, her expression still unreadable. Then let's get to work. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Emma had never felt so overwhelmed, but Dominic kept pushing forward, each move more calculated than the last. They spent hours working with Sarah, piecing together information, following leads, and trying to anticipate Petrov's next move. The photo, still in Emma's possession, felt like a heavy weight she couldn't shake. It wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a symbol of everything that had spiraled out of control. Sarah had laid out a plan. They were going to use the photo to bait Petrov and the others hunting for it. But Emma couldn't help but feel uneasy. Every step they took felt like they were walking closer to a point of no return. Every time Dominic spoke, his calm demeanor made it seem like he was always in control, but Emma knew better. She could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes whenever he thought no one was watching. He was as trapped as she was, but he wasn't showing it. That night, as they sat around a small table in Sarah's office, going over their strategy one last time, Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. Dominic sat across from her, his usual cool expression replaced with a hint of concern she hadn't seen before. Sarah stood at the window, her back to them, looking out at the city below. The tension in the room was palpable. You've all done your part, Sarah said, turning to face them. Now it's time to set the trap. We use the photo as leverage. Petrov and his people won't be able to resist. But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets. Emma nodded, trying to swallow the rising anxiety in her chest. What if it goes wrong? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic looked at her, his eyes softening slightly. If it goes wrong, we adapt. We don't have a choice. We have to do this. Emma wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline or the fear, but she found herself agreeing with him. They had no choice. They were in this together, and there was no going back. The next few hours felt like a blur. They worked with Sarah to finalize the details. They were ready, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The photo, the people after it, Petrov, it was all connected, but how? And why did she feel like she was being pulled into something much bigger than herself? The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. As they made their final preparations, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She had crossed a line, and now she had no way out. As the night drew on, they set the plan into motion. The stage was set. Petrov would take the bait, and they would finally get answers. But deep down, Emma wondered if she was ready for what was coming. Would they be able to control the situation, or would it spiral out of their hands? And as the seconds ticked by, she knew one thing for certain. The storm was coming, and she was in the eye of it. The trap was set. The time had come. Emma could feel her pulse racing as she and Dominic sat in the back of the car, heading toward the location where they planned to confront Petrov's network. It had been a long, tense few days, but now there was no turning back. The photo, which had started this entire chain of events, was about to be the key that unlocked all the answers. As the car pulled to a stop in front of an old warehouse, Emma could barely breathe. The adrenaline surged through her, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What would happen once they confronted Petrov? What if they were walking into a trap of their own? Dominic turned to her, his eyes steady as always. "Stay calm," he said, his voice low. "We stick to the plan. We get the information we need and get out. Fast." Emma nodded, trying to steady herself. She had no idea what they were up against, but she trusted Dominic. She had to. The two of them walked into the warehouse, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Shadows danced across the walls, and the air was thick with tension. They were close. The final piece was in place. Emma's heart pounded as they reached the center of the room. And then they saw him, Petrov. He stood there, a smirk on his face as he watched them approach. "I knew you'd come for it," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "But you're too late." Emma felt a surge of panic. "What do you mean?" she demanded. Petrov's smile widened, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. "The photo isn't just a key to power. It's a key to control. And now, you're both part of a much larger game. You won't get out of it alive." The weight of his words hit Emma like a ton of bricks. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had no idea how deep the game went, but now it was clear it wasn't just about the photo. It was about control, manipulation, and survival. As the tension in the room mounted, Emma realized one thing. No matter how much she wanted to walk away, there was no escape now. They were in it, for better or worse. And she would have to face whatever came next, because backing out was never an option. The game had already begun. In this world, trust was a rare commodity, and loyalty was a currency people rarely paid in. But there was something Emma had learned through all of this. The cost of playing in this world wasn't just about money or power. It was about the choices you made and the people you let into your life. In the end, it wasn't just the photo that mattered. It was the decisions that led her here. This story is a reminder that every choice counts, and every step you take, no matter how small, can have a lasting impact. Whether you're navigating personal relationships or facing a bigger challenge, always remember, what you do today shapes your tomorrow. So, choose wisely, and know that the game you're playing may be more complex than you think. Be ready to face the consequences of your choices, because in the end, the story you write is yours to own.